Okay. Good afternoon. I'm going to try to wake you all up a little, so I'm going to tell you a story. In Arabic, we say "Asatna qissa," or we've got a story to tell you. Once upon a time, if you look back in time, we can go many decades back, we can go a century back, we can go over a century and a half back. We can see it was already planned that Palestine would no longer exist. And that started with Bayam Weizmann, who said that there was a land with no people. And amazingly, I mean, we talk about dehumanization, but this went beyond dehumanization because it talked about non-humans. There was no people, so they didn't even have a chance to dehumanize us. We simply didn't exist. And then it was followed by numerous other Israelis who came along. We can go through the whole list, but it comes to former, the previous Prime Minister of Israel, who's now dead, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Yitzhak Rabin, who said, we will give them no permits. This is 1985, when we were totally an agricultural society. No permits for these people. If they're going to have agriculture industry, don't give them any permits. Which basically said that if you're farmers, and that's how you're making your livelihood, you cannot live, you cannot survive on your lands. So if you're not human and you are trying to be human and survive, we will take that away. But I think my favorite is the statement that was made only a few days ago on Facebook by a former Israeli Attorney General. And he basically has said in Facebook, and he's being challenged within Israeli society, he said that what we have now with the settlements and the acts going on in Israel and in Palestine, it's basically the most evil and immoral act since the end of World War II. And I think that those are words that we should remember as we listen to what's happening. Because next, the illusion that we're faced with actually shows that if you look back at 1999, I'm not going to go back far, but if you look back at 1999, our GDP was 4.1 billion, and now it's over 8 billion. We had a per capita of 1,400 or 1,500. Now it's much more. But our poverty rate back then was only 21%. Now our poverty rate is up to 25 or 28% the last 3 years. And it's double the rate between the West Bank and Gaza. So you see trends beginning to emerge. Look at the unemployment. 11% in 1999, and now we have over, 25% who are unemployed. These are numbers that are important because if you look behind the numbers, what you see is that places like East Jerusalem and Gaza are disproportionately poor. So we're ending up not just with fragmenting our society, but making it a dysfunctional society, where East Jerusalemites don't like West Bankers don't like Gazans, because all of them are fighting over social and economic situations that we have not controlled. What's interesting, though, is look back at those days. From 1994 to 1999, we never got more than $200 to $300 million worth of aid. We got zero in humanitarian aid. And now, billions of dollars later, where are we? We have a deteriorating financial situation where we're already in debt, $3 billion. Our manufacturing, which used to account for over 18%, is now less than 11%. And our budgeted aid, what we're asking for in 2013, is actually 5 times the amount that we were getting in 1999 when we were totally solvent. We did not have any financial crisis at that point in time. If you look at the next thing, at our basic socioeconomic situation, people love zayt. Zayt is oil. Oil, we can live on zayt and za'atar. That was the call when we said solidarity in Samud. As long as we have zayt and za'atar. But even that is being taken away from us. So you look and you say, in 2006, I'm not even going to go back because we actually had higher oil production, we were making 160,000 tons of olive oil. Now we're only making 105,000. And that's got tons. Now that's not because our people are working in factories and in IT. It's simply because the trees are being uprooted. People are not allowed to farm their land. We've had 1 million dunams of our land taken away for security, wall, settlements, seam zones, buffer zones. They lose us in the details. And I think one of the important things I do is in telling the stories, you tell the details. But when it comes to the point where they're prodding us, when I can tell you things like they closed in Gaza, and when they challenged the humanitarian workers saying, no, they have enough food coming in, they calculated it. They've actually released the documents that said in Gaza, they need 1,300 calories We have enough food entering in there. So that's just like me right now, as I've told the security executive, you noticed, we closed all the doors. And I calculated, for this room, with the amount of water we have in it, you all could live in here for 3 days and it wouldn't affect you physically. So we've decided we'll keep you here for 3 days. It's not going to hurt you. You have enough calories. You just ate a nice meal. So we'll just keep you in here. And we'll decide when to let you go. If that's not evil, I don't know what is. That's Gaza. That's West Bank. At any time, with the drop of a hat, we can be locked up. And that's what occupation is. We can give you the numbers. We can tell you how many days kids don't go to school. We can tell you how many calories. But we can tell you, as people working in children's rights, is that we have double the rates of anemia in our children, double the rates of stunting, double the rates of wasting. In a country that has never, ever been food insecure. And that's what we're talking about today. So if you look at the numbers up there, they're wonderful numbers. World Bank puts out the numbers, IMF puts out the numbers, FAO puts out numbers. The only people who aren't really putting out numbers on Gaza and in Area C and in East Jerusalem, guess who? Palestinians. And we're thankful for OCHA that is putting out these numbers. But they have lots of numbers that are coming up now. We're going to see some very interesting ones. Some of them are the GDP between Palestine and Israel, 1,800 and 27,000. Now, if I was going to be very nice, I'd say, well, that's because, God dang it, they're just so good at what they do. But actually, it has to do with, we got $5 billion worth of aid, they got $30 billion worth of aid. On top of that, they got $7 billion of our resources, of our land, of our water, of our minerals, of our tourism, of our gas sites, on top of that. If you figure, let's be generous here and underestimate, let's say $5 billion over the last 10 years is what they took from us.
Annually.
Annually, that's $50 billion, plus the $30 billion that they get from the US, that's $80 billion. Now, I think that we could have done dang well for ourselves had we had that money. So I don't chalk it up to them having supernatural powers. I think what it is it's pure economic and political exploitation. Now, the other side of it is, I hate to say this, because I'm really basically a nice person. If you got to know me, I'm not really mean. I tend to be fairly decent. But I want to tell you something that everyone in the news always talks about it. Israeli settlers and soldiers are not nice to Palestinians. They're mean. I mean, I can use that term mean, and I can talk to my own experience. I can tell you things that have happened to my children, to my husband, to myself. So I'm not talking for all Palestinians, but I can tell you that it's the rare occasion that I've met a decent Israeli soldier. I've yet to meet a decent Israeli settler. And that's my personal experience, and I believe in it, and I can give you the data. And unfortunately, that's what we have to track. We have to track the number of fatalities. We have to track, yes, we have 1,000 children, half of them under the age of 14, who are arrested every year, put into prison, treated differently, tortured, having reports come out even by UNICEF that doesn't want to use the term torture, even though it's been verified. And then we're told that we should be quiet and we should stop throwing rockets. Now, I don't want to get into this thing about military power and everything, but I think a country that can stand up to all the Arab countries and to other major nuclear invested countries, they can't be afraid of our small little pipe bombs. I mean, that just doesn't ring true, and I think we have to admit it. At the same time, what we do see happening is in Palestine, you see people getting depressed. They're getting anxious. They're having post-traumatic stress disorders. Is it 5%? Yes. Is it 10%? Yes. Is it 30%? Yes. We actually had data coming out of Palestine at the end of the first Intifada by very credible institutions, learning institutions from the United States, that said 85% of the people in Gaza were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, amazingly, after the Oslo Accords were signed, we didn't have post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's a cure. If you want to get rid of post-traumatic stress disorder in your societies, sign an Oslo Accord. Because those same people who had PTSD back then, they actually turned out to be our ministers and our health workers and our doctors and our lawyers. So we are quite resilient. And so for every Palestinian who does experience depression, we have those who are becoming stronger and more resilient. And that's the good side of our story. is that we're not going anywhere, and people are getting stronger. People of the youth of today. I think it's people like, Dr. Riyad may get mad at me, but I think it's people like Dr. Riyad and I who are going to take a back seat. And it's our youth who are going to be sitting at the table saying, yes, we are equal. Yes, we do know international law. Yes, we know international law doesn't work, but we will use it, and we will respect it, and we will get our rights. And that's where we're going with this. And it's not going to be that we're going to continue to function in an abnormal situation and be told to act normal, to play the game, to come along to all of these things and act as if everything's okay. And if we act like the state, and if we smell like the state, and if we do all the things and we get an A in our report card for having no corruption, and if we get an A for having good rule of law, then maybe, just maybe, we'll let you be a state. Well, we are a state, and that's where we have to change our minds. Next, I'm not going to go over this slide because that's the slide you all saw 2 years ago. This is all the data. There's so much data out there on Palestine, and that's why you're all bored, because you've heard it before. But this is the stuff that showed that even in 2010, this is what Israel was getting out of us as Palestinians. And why it's so horrendous, next one, is because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is that it is dispossession. It's dispossessing you. It's like, imagine me walking around the room and taking everything out of your pocket and saying, yes, I can. Military Order 112 says that your telephone could cause me a security risk because you may call someone to do something that I don't like, so I will confiscate what's in it. I'm going to take your money out of your pocket because I don't know what you're going to do with that money that's in your pocket. Now, we can talk in very flowery terms, and I can put it in terms of saying that this is for security reasons, this is because someone died, but at the end of the day, this is exactly what it is. It's control over economics, plain and simple. And Jeremy Wilderman just very recently said, the crippling truth is one of poverty, personal insecurity, and protracted economic decline. That's Palestine he's describing. But what's horrendous about this is that it's actually used now to distract the world from really solving the problems. What are the problems? It's exile. It's land confiscation. It's water confiscation. It's taking away our livelihoods. It's about our history, denying our narrative. For 10 years, we have sat in Palestine having arguments back and forth with all European countries, with Israel, with America, saying, oh, you're trying to deny the Israelis their history. And once they finally did a do-all study on the Palestinian and Israeli curriculum, and it turns out that we were not insightful. Even though we've been saying that for 10 years, even though for numerous years they prevented us from printing our textbooks, and only to have us be smeared in the public as that we're insightful. Now, we don't need to tell lies to incite, because the truth is, occupation is ugly and dirty and nasty, and they're doing it. I don't have to do anything to show that it's not a pretty sight. It is ugly. Now, if you look at that, we end up with displacement. You're dispossessed, no home, no livelihood. Well, if you're a father or you're a mother, and you cannot have a house over your child, you cannot guarantee their safety, you cannot take them to the health clinic, you cannot guarantee that they can get to school safely. Do you stay on your plot of land? What do? Do you keep your children out of school? What do you do? Before we turn the page, think, what would you do? That's the predicament that over 350,000 Palestinians living in Area C have to make every single day. Do they decide to live in misery on their land and stick to their guns and say, this is my land, this is what I inherited from my father, this is Palestine, this is me? Or do you move 20 kilometers east so that you can take your child to a health clinic? Who puts people in that kind of condition? Who? Remember what the former Attorney General said. And this is not something new. We're sitting here, I'm sure you're all bored because you've been doing this now for the last, 30, 40 years. But if you go back, we've been displaced since 1922. 150,000 people were displaced between 1922 and 1947. From 1948, the next vote was 750,000 Palestinians. Then in 1949, it's the next one. Oh, it's up there. 1949, more. And then 1967, more. And 1967 till now, over 160,000. And amazingly, look where they're displaced from. Surprise. I don't see them displaced from Gaza, do you? Heck no, no one's caring about Gaza right now. Where have they been displaced? It's East Jerusalem. It's the Jordan Valley. It's Hebron. Isn't that amazing? Those are all the sites where all the settlements are all located at. That's where our major tourist sites are. That's where our agriculture is. That's where our major water aquifers are. Oh wow, this makes a beautiful site in Palestine. If you look in Gaza though, they're living miserable lives, no matter what the people tell you, no matter what Hamas says. We still have 34% of people are unemployed, and over half of them are youth who are unemployed. Think about your own societies. If 50% of your youth did not have jobs, and that's the same figure almost in the West Bank, what's going to happen after a year or two? These people want to get married. These people want to have lives. These people want to set up homes. They're basically sitting going, Well, that builds up into frustration. That builds up into anger. That builds up into resentment. And that will have an outlet. And I don't think it's going to be a violent outlet. I think it'll turn inwards before it ever turns outwards, actually. But I think that it's important to remember those things. It's important to remember in Gaza what you've done to a people who only less than 6 years ago were not food insecure. They were making their own food. They had no food insecurity. Now, 44% of them are food aid dependent. That means they have to line up and get handed a bag of flour, some cans of beans, and oil in order to survive. These are men and women who have skills, who had jobs, and their humanity has been taken away from them. You hear fuel crisis. You think, okay, let them walk. How far is it? But did you think about the 10-story buildings with a lady who's crippled, who's sitting on the top floor and has to get to the doctors, and she can't go down the 10 flights of stairs? Did you think about the mother who has to come up and down stairs to get her children who get stuck in elevators when the electricity just goes off like this? These are the kind of things in the middle of operations in hospitals where the electricity gets cut off and doctors have to make do, and so you have dying patients. This is what a fuel shortage means when they get cut off in the middle and they don't have control. If your own government can control it and they tell the people, listen you guys, 6 p.m. we're cutting off your electricity, that's one thing. But to have it in the middle of cooking, operation, major events, just gets cut off, you don't know control. This lack of control is really killing the people. Then you have a glass of water. Can you imagine sitting in Gaza and knowing that 95% of the water that you have available to give to your children has 8 times the nitrate level, so that you have an option. Either your child gets water so that they can survive at least to the next day, or you give your child the water knowing that the likelihood of them getting cancer, because it has such high levels of nitrate, is 5 times the normal rate for any other person. Those are the decisions. So when you remember those words, evil and immoral, those are the things to remember. Not just, is it a settlement? It's why those settlements are there. Why was it that in 2005, when Israeli settlements were still in the midst of Gaza, why was it that there was enough clean water being pumped into Gaza so that they could irrigate their lands and produce roses and flowers and strawberries? And miraculously, after 2005, those water sources dried up. How could that be? Who's doing it? We have to ask ourselves. Ask about security. Who should be secure? Who's insecure? If you look at the rates, these are the actual rates, not my numbers. You can go to any UN document. You have 6 Israelis, 6 Palestinians for every Israeli has been killed in the last 10 years. You have 20 Palestinians to every one Israeli who's been killed. Who's insecure? I feel a little insecure with those bets. In East Jerusalem, same thing. Look at the patterns. The numbers don't really matter. Look at the patterns. In Jerusalem, how does it start? It doesn't start with them just saying, we're going to take this land. But they basically say, okay, we're only going to give them 35% of East Jerusalem, which is totally Palestinian. East Jerusalem for Israeli settlements, which is against the Port Geneva Convention, has 35%, plus then, let's be nice, we're going to have some green areas and public infrastructures. So they really don't put in green areas. They just leave it blank for later use. Then you end up with 30% that we're not sure what we're going to do with this land. And then we'll leave 13% of the remaining land for the Palestinians. And this is all their land to begin with, right? These are the numbers. We have 10,000 children sitting in the midst of East Jerusalem who don't have access to any education because we're not allowed to build classrooms for them. We have 14,000 Jerusalemites who have their residency rights stripped from them. That's a horrible number. What makes it even more grievous when you think at that same time that they were taking 14,000 permits of residency for Palestinians, they were giving 150,000 Israelis permits and residency rights in those same locations. 10 times the number. 10 times the number. When you look at this, this is forced displacement. These people are paying taxes, but then they can't access the social services there. We've had 2,000 homes that have been destroyed. In Area C, same thing. We had 350,000 Palestinians living in Area C. So what you do, you start telling them, either get out of your house now, we're going to blow your house up, or you take it apart, and you're looking out your window while you're forced to destroy your own house. An Israeli settlement, a beautiful Israeli settlement is coming up on the hillside. This is the epiphany that we're facing, is that Palestinians are told to be calm, to be nice, follow international law. We have more people who know international human rights, like Salwa, in Palestine than you can imagine. We have more UN agencies per capita than any other place in the world, I'm sure of that. We have more donors in our country than anywhere else in the world, and we're more miserable than ever before. Areas you've heard a lot about, but basically it's bad. Now what are our social conditions? We have school dropouts, it's increasing. We have decreasing achievement scores. We have increasing number of children who are stunting and wasting and anemia. We have increased children with non-communicable diseases. That means of diabetes, of obesity, of asthma, all right? We have all these things happening, and we still have those who are living in the rural, refugee, or Gaza areas are the poorest and have the most limited sources of access to resources. Now, I mean, those of us who study development, what are the things that ignite conflict? Poverty, having your resources taken away from you, not being able to find jobs. Now, if things do explode, can we say we did not know? Can we say that those were conditions that we were not familiar with? Everyone knows it. And I think that's exactly what we're facing right now. And if you look at those areas where we have the highest dysfunction, it's those areas where there has been forced displacement all along. And that's the key of our problem. It has been, and it always has been. This next slide is just a number just to show you that we're always trying to compare ourselves with all the other countries to see how good we are and how bad we are. All we can tell you is that we are getting worse. We're not getting better. And I cannot blame, I don't want to say it's the PA. It's not a PA issue. It's the idea that every single document has come out saying there can be no development in Palestine as long as there's education. But in the meantime, let's invest in development. Okay, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, if you know that as much as you do, that you cannot have control over your country economically, then no amount of funds coming into the country is going to make things better. It'll only make an illusion. So you can see in the next one, what we have actually. This is that bottom red line, I think it's the red line. That's how much we've gotten in humanitarian aid over the last 10 years, or from 2003. So today, basically what you see is this. From 2003 to 2012, we got $2.765 billion worth of humanitarian assistance. Thank you, Sweden, Norway, Britain, US, Germany, everyone has, with the Arab countries, everyone has been very generous with us on humanitarian assistance. Over the same period of time, we've gotten $3 billion in development. We always compare ourselves with our neighbors. We can't help it. It's human nature. Our Israeli neighbors got $30 billion over the same period of time, in addition to other funds that went for military. Less than 15% of these funds have actually ever gone to Area C or East Jerusalem. And that's why we have the highest rates of poverty there. Now, one number I went through, and I tried to calculate as much as I could, how much of that, what is it, comes up to? Almost $6 billion worth. less than 0.01% ever went to fighting legal battles in court for our rights. Less than 0.01%. Can you imagine that? Even though we talk about justice and reverting to legal tools, and it's never been allowed in our programs. So now what we have is over 50% of the population in Gaza is food insecure or dependent on food aid. Now they try to hide the numbers, but the actual number is 80% of Gazans depend on some sort of assistance in order to survive. And this was a territory that was fully independent, not aid dependent. Thousands of families are now internally displaced. Millions of Palestinians are still refugees. There's land, water, and jobs are scarcer. Access and movement is difficult. They trace it. I mean, right now, as of today, we have 530 checkpoints. 530 checkpoints, you know what I mean? I mean, I traveled from my house to get to the bridge, which is literally, if I would not stop, is the standard 40. I went through 3 checkpoints. Okay? And this is, I'm all on Palestinian land, by the way. The Israelis stop you everywhere. There's no freedom, sovereignty, or respect. And what we've learned, money will not buy us freedom. It won't be that. And no country has been liberated through international law. People of the country have liberated them. And that's where we have to do. Look to today is that we need to change our mind. And I'm talking about we as Palestinians. We need to have a national dialogue, internal discourse again with our people. We need to prioritize national solidarity and reunification. We have to reunify in our own minds. We have to reimagine Palestine without the settlements. It is garbage when you hear people say, well, look at how are we going to get rid of all these settlements? Just the way they were built. You know, and just the way that they were built, they can be unbuilt. And we've seen it happen in Gaza when they removed the settlements, and we can unbuild them in the West Bank. So we don't have to keep thinking that settlements have to stay. No, they don't. We need to target community mobilization and volunteer programs. We need to target reclamation of our rural and borderlands. Let's claim our natural resources, and let's get the funds. If we do have funds, let's put it there to do that, not to do it in Ramallah and entice people to come to Ramallah and build up Ramallah as this little metropolis, and people leave the areas. We need to initiate youth-wide agriculture and ICT programs. We need to hold both the PA and Israel responsible for protecting Palestinian citizen rights. We need to develop our own national spatial plans, which show exactly where we want our water resources, where we want our electricity resources, where we want our roads. And by the way, they're going to be exactly where the settlements are today. We need to disregard, and I say, well, we need to disregard Israeli policies. There is no reason that we have to listen to Israeli policies. We are the state of Palestine, and as long as Israel doesn't follow international law, I don't know why we have to follow an agreement. So I think that we should be able to say that very clearly. We should take them to legal court internally within Israel, even though we know what's going to happen, and then take them to international court. And then we need to ensure that every single penny that comes into Palestine for development or international humanitarian assistance, that it has legal aid and remedy funds built into it, or we turn it back. And thank you. The end of the story. Thank you.